Battlefield 6 is almost here, just a few months away. This is probably the most important Battlefield title in the franchise's history. We all know Battlefield 5 had a very rocky start, to say the least. It did make some major strides with the Pacific content drop, but as a whole, it was already too late. The fact that Call of Duty had an amazing release with the Modern Warfare reboot and Warzone didn't really help as well. Now, it's been 3 years since the last Battlefield game, Battlefield 5, and the franchise is now in a very critical position. If the next Battlefield game comes out of the gate really well, so, really polished, no bugs and glitches and good balance and stuff like that, it's gonna be a huge success. But there are a couple of things that needs to be done in order to not only compete against the competition, such as Call of Duty and stuff, but also compete against itself. Battlefield 6 needs to bring the whole franchise to a new level. Now let's quickly summarize what we already know about the next Battlefield game. This is from Battlefield Bulletin over on Twitter. So first things first, it will be developed by more studios than ever before. DICE Stockholm, DICE LA, Criterion to name a few. It will launch on current gen console as well as last gen consoles, or current gen and last gen, whatever you want to call it. This is probably the biggest news we've gotten so far, but more on that later. Also, it will release on PC, obviously. It will release somewhere between October and December of this year, so the holiday season. The official reveal will be somewhere next month in June. It will be a relaunch of the franchise, so I guess some sort of reboot like they did with Call of Duty Modern Warfare. It will be all-out military warfare, so I guess nothing like Hardline, since Hardline was cops versus robbers. It will have unprecedented scale with massive battles and game-changing destruction. That sounds pretty cool. Vehicle and weapon combat elevated to another level. That also sounds pretty cool. Unbelievable player count, gonna touch on that too in a minute. Incredible live service. It will have innovative and creative game modes. And last but not least, Battlefield Mobile will also release, even before April of next year. But for this video, we're not gonna talk about Battlefield Mobile, even though I'm actually very interested in that, not gonna lie. So anyway, all of that sounds really cool with a lot of big words and stuff like that, but obviously it doesn't really say all that much, except for a couple of things, like the fact that it will be released on both generations of consoles and that it will have an quote-unquote unbelievable player count. So with all of that information, we have some sort of vague image of what the next Battlefield game will look like, but in this video I want to talk about some new features and mechanics that I personally would like to see and that the game most likely will have, at least somewhere down the line. So first things first, this one is obvious.
Guns. Lots of guns.
And lots of gun customization options. In modern first-person shooter games nowadays, having extensive weapon customization is a must in my opinion. In the last two Battlefield games, so Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, weapon customization wasn't really a thing. In Battlefield 1, you could choose like 2 or 3 different weapon variants of a single gun at most, and that was it. In Battlefield 5, you had these so-called specializations, which could alter your weapon's performance a little bit, but this too was pretty lackluster. Only a handful of weapons in Battlefield 5 had unique specializations. Like for example the M1 Garand, which can equip a grenade launcher as a specialization, the M3 Grease Gun can equip a suppressor, and the Type 11 LMG, which can have unique reloading animations for faster reloads, but other than that, nothing really, noteworthy. If you look at Modern Warfare for example, and just a heads up, I'm gonna be referring to Call of Duty Modern Warfare a lot in this video, so you have been warned. In Modern Warfare, I think they did gun customization pretty much perfectly, considering what type of game it actually is, a casual, easy to get into, first-person shooter. The gun customization was so in-depth compared to the previous games in the franchise, it just brought a whole new aspect to the game, and it not only altered the look and the feel of the weapon, but it also had a huge impact on the actual playstyle in-game. For example, if you play Ground War where you have long-range engagements, you want to have a longer barrel for faster bullet velocity and other attachments for reduced recoil. Obviously that comes at the cost of mobility, so if you prefer a more agile loadout for search and destroy for example, you'll most likely choose a lightweight SMG and a knife as a secondary to move faster. This kind of personal choice is what I really like about the customization options in Modern Warfare, and I really hope to see something similar in the next Battlefield game. If you want to take it up a notch, you can have something similar to Escape from Tarkov. I'm pretty sure that's about as in-depth as you can get for a first-person shooter video game. But then again, Call of Duty and Escape from Tarkov are two very different games Let me know down below what kind of weapon customization you want to see in the next Battlefield game, and also while you're down there be sure to drop a like on this video and of course subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Okay, moving on. Player count. Now, like I mentioned earlier, EA themselves have said that the next Battlefield game will have quote-unquote unbelievable player count. What does this mean? I think it's safe to say we will have more than 64 players as a maximum in one game, because otherwise it wouldn't be unbelievable. I think, 128 players, so double of 64, that would be my best guess and what I honestly expect at the very least. A lot of people actually don't even want a higher player count, as they feel like 64 players is more than enough, and I can see what I mean. It's just that, with more players comes bigger maps and stuff like that, and all of that combined means just a more epic battle, and that's what I like to see. Like MAG, for example, MAG from back in the day, if anyone remembers that game. Now, one thing that I am very curious about is the difference between last gen and current gen consoles. If you remember correctly, when Battlefield 4 launched in 2013, you had a PS3 and a PS4 version, and the PS3 version would have only, I believe, either 32 players or even 24 players as a maximum, and the PS4 version would have 64 players like the PC version. So if something similar would happen again this time around, that would mean that the PS4 version or the last gen version of the game could potentially still have 64 players as a maximum, and the next gen version and PC would have an increased player count, whatever the number may be. So that's pretty interesting to think about. Okay, next up, I want to go over some things rather quickly. So these are more general fast-paced points that I want to point out. First of all, gunplay. I don't want to have the Battlefield 4 gunplay where you have to micro-burst or tap-fire everything. I want tap-fire and bursting to be, useful, to have its use, but I don't want it to be a necessity. I do not want the stupid random bullet deviation from Battlefield 1 either. Don't need to say much about that. I want more, recoil-based accuracy. So where I aim, where my crosshairs are, I want my bullets to go, and not to the top right of my screen like in Battlefield 1. Battlefield 5 was actually a huge step up in the franchise in terms of the gunplay, in my opinion. It definitely felt more modern, but it wasn't without flaws, not by a long shot. For example, random recoil patterns. You gotta get rid of those. Of course, there's always gonna be some sort of randomness, but it has to be at least a little bit predictable. Now, time to kill, or TTK, is always a very difficult one in my opinion. It heavily depends on what game you play. If you play a more hardcore, simulation type of game, then the time to kill is gonna be pretty fast. If you play a more casual first-person shooter or a battle royale with armor mechanics, then the time to kill is gonna take a little bit longer. So I would like to hear from you guys down in the comment section below. What game do you feel like has a good or, decent time to kill that you want to see something similar to in the next Battlefield game? Let me know down below. I actually think that, in general, the time to kill in Battlefield 5 right now isn't half bad. As for the gunplay itself, like I said, recoil based is the way to go for the last couple of years, and I think Modern Warfare, again, is a very good example of how to do it right. Most guns feel generally different from each other, but, still viable most of the time. Recoil across the board in that game is pretty easy to manage. That's why you always see people mag dumping everything instead of, tap firing and burst firing. So I would like to see some sort of a hybrid between those, which is not an easy task by any means, so I'm very curious to see how it's gonna be like. Next up, we're gonna talk about vehicle gameplay. Now, this one is legit a difficult one because you have a whole lot of players in the entire player base who's gonna say something different. Some people will say, for example, that the planes in Battlefield 5 are extremely overpowered, and some people will say the exact opposite, as an example. If we're gonna focus on the tanks for a minute here, I think out of all the Battlefield games, when it comes to tanking, Battlefield 4 did it best. It was pretty easy to get into, but the skill ceiling was still relatively high. It can take a while before you can master the art of tanking in that game. Everything from mobility to shot placements and, timing and stuff like that is multi-dimensional, unlike tanking in Battlefield 1, for example, which is just 90% hilltop camping. One small contributor to that playstyle, in my opinion, is actually the third-person camera perspective. Let's compare it to Battlefield 4. Sure, you still have a wider field of view in the third-person perspective, but it's still narrow enough to force you to be mindful of your surroundings. That's why you could sneak up to a tank in that game and blow them up with C4. Something that's not really possible in Battlefield 1 and certainly not in Battlefield 5. Battlefield 5 kinda tried to use the War Thunder gameplay for the tanks, and that's definitely not a bad design by any means, but I just feel like it works less good compared to Battlefield 4. But of course, I wanna know what you guys think, so let me know down below. In short, I want the vehicles in the next Battlefield game to be accessible, obviously, but with a high enough skill ceiling. And then maybe you can have some sort of loadouts or specific vehicles that require more skill from the get-go. But at least overall, something that doesn't reward playing passively 90% of the time. Next up, we're gonna talk about content and the amount of content. First and foremost, we need guns. This time I'm talking about the amount of guns. Again, Battlefield 4 and Modern Warfare have done this absolutely right. You have so many different choices when it comes to equipping a gun. There is something for everyone, whether it be about rate of fire, accuracy, even reload times, stuff like that. Combine that with the in-depth weapon customization and you have a win-win situation. Now, considering the next Battlefield game will most likely be Modern Era or near future, that alone gives us a ton of content options. Think about experimental weapons even. Remember the railgun from Battlefield 4? Things like that. And speaking of which, I wouldn't mind weapon pickups making a return, or even elite classes. I know a lot of people found it kinda cheesy in Battlefield 1, myself included, but I don't know, I always kinda liked it. Remember, it's a casual shooter, it doesn't really cater towards the ultra skilled players, and in my opinion it shouldn't. It should cater to the average player, but obviously it should reward skilled players. There's a difference there. So a variety of different playstyles in the next Battlefield game would be cool. Think about perks, for example, like in Modern Warfare. Think about, faster sprinting speed, faster crouching speed, you name it. Also, gadgets. Something we pretty much haven't seen since Battlefield 4. Yeah, I mean, we have a handful of gadgets in Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, but those were mostly some sort of variations of explosives and stuff like that, or spotting flares. In Battlefield 4, you had so many different gadgets to choose from, and most of them were pretty useless in most scenarios, I'm not gonna lie, so I can imagine it being difficult to balance these, but still, having a wide variety of gadgets would be awesome. Also, who can forget about the maps? Maps are very rarely talked about in my opinion, even though they are one of the key aspects, that predicts or decides how successful or good a Battlefield game can be. Now, I'm gonna say something that might be a little bit controversial here. In my opinion, we haven't had a Battlefield game with all-round good maps across the board since Battlefield 3. Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 all have a handful of decent maps, don't get me wrong, but I feel like in Battlefield 3, it really felt like the maps were designed around a certain game mode, and that resulted in a very good flow of the map. A good example is Demavan Peak while playing Rush. You fight for these first set of MCOM stations, and when you destroy them and move on to the next base, you have this epic base jump that's literally always fun, to jump off every single time. And the area you land in is very much different. It's more close quarter focused, so stuff like that can really help keep a game feeling fresh. It's unique, it's different. In my opinion, we haven't really seen that since Battlefield 3. And speaking of which, let's talk about game modes. I think this is one aspect that the Battlefield franchise really under-delivers in compared to, surprise surprise, Call of Duty. In Modern Warfare you have everything ranging from normal TDM to free-for-all, to large-scale battles in ground war, to objective-based game modes such as Search and Destroy, to party game modes such as Gun Game, and in Black Ops Cold War we even have Prop Hunt and much more. There is so much variety to break up the potential staleness that you get after playing for a while. With Battlefield, it's always either Rush or Conquest or Operations, and since Rush servers are always extinct, it's gonna be regular Conquest and Breakthrough for 99% of the time. Now in Battlefield 4 you at least had Gunmaster, but since then we haven't seen that, and that's my favorite game mode of all time, so if anything, I just hope to see the return of Gun Game. Okay, so far we talked about guns and gun customization, we talked about vehicles and how I would like to see them being implemented in the game, we talked about maps, game modes, gunplay, TTK, all that stuff. One thing we haven't talked about yet is the single player campaign. I personally would love to see a single player campaign in the next Battlefield game. Until very recently, there was a time where a lot of people actually wanted to get rid of the single player campaign in Battlefield and wanted the developers to focus only on the multiplayer. I was never a fan of that. I think that a single player campaign can bring a lot of value to the game and overall just make it a better product. Even though Battlefield 5 and specifically Battlefield 4 were pretty bad in that department, Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 3 did it actually really well, so I would love to see a campaign return. They didn't really talk about it, I believe, in their earnings call, so I don't know if it will be there, we just have to wait and see. And last but not least, music and sound design. Not really important to talk about it in regards to a Battlefield game because they pretty much always nail the soundtrack and the sound design. But still, I want to mention it. If the next Battlefield game is going to be set in modern times again, I'm just hoping for a very epic main theme like in Battlefield 4. I'm looking forward to it. I hope they add it to the main reveal trailer. Anyway, that's about it for the video, guys. I just quickly wanted to talk about some things that I would like to see in the next Battlefield game to bring the franchise to a new level. We didn't get too in-depth because otherwise this video would be like 2 hours long. But of course, I want to know your guys' opinion. So be sure to let me know down below what you guys want to see in the next Battlefield game specifically. You know, whether it be something specifically about vehicles or gunplay, whatever. Let me know down below. Also be sure to drop a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can join the Discord, link is down below. And with that being said, I see you guys next time.